Hey folks, author MJ Gallagher here and welcome back to Rebirth Revealed, a series presented and funded by Chocobo. This episode covers many of the details you may have missed from Chapter 8, All That Glitters. Moving forward, we've decided to tweak the format of these videos to make the content a bit snappier and easier to digest. Be sure to leave any feedback you have on this new approach in the comments below. As always, spoilers beyond this part of the game are minimal, but please beware of likely spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII, its remake, and the compilation in general. So let's hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and see what gold we can find. Chapter 8 begins with the party riding the ropeway towards the Gold Saucer, the giant ultra-modern amusement park at the heart of the Kirel region. They see holograms of the summons Ifrit and Shiva fly around the carriage. Not only does this indicate the entities are known to the general populace, but once the player unlocks Chapter Select by completing Rebirth, Ifrit and Shiva can both be battled in 3D Brawler. Previously called 3D Battler, this is a minigame that's been lifted straight from Wonder Square in the old Final Fantasy VII. The name of the chapter itself comes from the phrase "all that glitters is not gold", whose meaning is to warn against things that aren't as valuable as they might appear. This could allude to many aspects of the Gold Saucer, but the line originated in the Shakespeare play The Merchant of Venice, suggesting a link to a certain theatre production at Event Square. Outside the main entrance to the park, we get our first glimpse of Cait Sith as he kicks off the dance sequence by hopping between three giant Muggles. Even in this moment, the visual language reveals quite a lot about his character. Court jester attire typically symbolises comedy relief and/or the trickster archetype, also common in Shakespeare, while having multiple versions of his iconic Moogle ride indicates, well, if you know, you know. Cait Sith then launches an orb of materia at Yuffie, transforming her outfit into the so-called Wutai Popstar ensemble. This is a likely callback to Final Fantasy X-2, which was directed by Motomu Toriyama, the man responsible for costume changes in Rebirth. In Final Fantasy X-2, the trio of heroines use dress spheres to swap outfits, and thus attributes, in battle, while the game opens with Yuna performing at a pop concert. Just as he does in Final Fantasy VII, park director Dio approaches Cloud as soon as he notices him. In Rebirth, however, he challenges the young man to a duel in a special edition of 3D Brawler. If Cloud wins, he lets his aloof demeanour slip and behaves like an excited kid. If Dio wins, he'll remark "close but no cigar", which is a line that's synonymous with Don Corneo in the original. As it happens, there are countless references to Corneo and Wallmarket throughout this chapter, and it's not by chance. At Park Central, the hub of the Gold Saucer, Cloud has another Sephiroth hallucination when he spots a robed figure. This reflects the player's initial encounter with Dio in the old game, where he mentions that a cloaked boy with a tattoo of the number 1 came asking about the black materia. Here, Aerith grabs Cloud's hand and rouses him from the illusion, mirroring the scene at the children's secret hideout in Remake, when the man with the number 2 tattoo appears to Cloud as Sephiroth. Curiously, the jukebox music playing at the hideout immediately after this is the Gold Saucer theme. While it's perhaps less obvious in Rebirth than it is in Final Fantasy VII, the Gold Saucer itself is based on the structure of a tree. Each of the 7 squares extend from the main trunk on branches of varying lengths and heights. The park's logo, as found on storage boxes and Moogle guides, makes the imagery a bit easier to recognise. As I explain in my book Norse Myths that Inspired Final Fantasy VII, this is unlikely to be a coincidence, because the world in which the Gold Saucer exists is already influenced by Viking legends. According to the Norsemen, the universe as we know it is connected by a cosmic tree, Yggdrasil. 2 of Yggdrasil's 9 worlds are Midgard and Niflheimer, from which Final Fantasy VII's Midgard and Nibelheim are derived. You may recall from the first episode of this series that I've already discussed several lore examples concerning the latter. while Yggdrasil itself is name-dropped in an accessory later in the game. You could even argue that the 7 branches, the central domain, and the underworld, at its roots, are analogous to the 9 realms of Yggdrasil. Additionally, the squares of the Gold Saucer are divided into 2 groups, Adventure World and Fantasy World. This creates an abstract parallel to the twin storylines playing out in Rebirth, the main plot with Cloud and the secondary tale with Zack. As I mentioned in the previous video, the story breakdown menu lists Zack's scenario under Interlude, a world apart, which is exactly where Cloud's mind seems to go when he falls asleep at the hotel. I wonder if it's all related, because this is certainly not the last we've seen of tree symbolism in the context of multiple worlds. Cloud and Barrett head to Ghost Square to book rooms for the night, only to find the pathway leading to the haunted hotel passes through a graveyard with lurking spectres. Barrett expresses his anger that the Gold Saucer is sucking up Mako for this, that souls from the livestream are being consumed to power these images of the dead. It's here that the player is properly introduced to everyone's favourite robotic cat, Kate Sith, complete with his glorious Scottish accent, as performed by my good friend Paul Tinto. The Scottish aspect came as a surprise to many fans back in 2005, when Kate's voice was first heard in Advent Children, followed up by his prominent role in Dirge of Cerberus. The reason for this is that the character derives from Celtic folklore, where the Coetzee were believed to be supernatural felines that haunted funerals, in order to steal the deceased soul before their burial. This is likely why Kate Sith appears to Cloud and Barrett in the graveyard. As a side note, Coetzee is actually a plural term and means something akin to the cats of the fairy mounds. The plurality is on display around the Gold Saucer, where several incarnations of Kate can be located. This is also important later in the story when, like I said, if you know, you know. Inside the hotel itself are some quirky elements and fun throwbacks to Final Fantasy VII. First of all, the clock initially has its hands at 2 minutes to midnight, a possible reference to Iron Maiden's 1984 hit song, but the Roman numerals on its face include the number 7 twice. A pair of apparitions are playing Queen's Blood rather than chess, as in the old game. Incidentally, 3D models that could be viewed in the Ultimania Omega confirmed that the chess pieces are actually shaped like summon monsters. And in the bar area, one man is telling his friend a ghost story about a Tonberry robot stabbing hotel guests. The friend ends the exchange by remarking a robot with a grudge, which is an allusion to the fatal attack performed by Tonberries in the Final Fantasy series, often called Everyone's Grudge. The concierge, meanwhile, is an adaptation of Mr. Hangman, the corpse-like employee who attends the hotel shop and reception in Final Fantasy VII by dropping down on a noose. Kate Sith reappears to solve the problem of there being no free rooms. This too reflects the old game, where he pulls some strings later in the story to ensure the party has a place to stay when the ropeway is out of service. To achieve this in Rebirth, he cancels the Turks' reservation on behalf of Director Palmer. Pausing the cutscene at the correct moment reveals that Kate Sith has hacked Rude's Shinra account. We know this because the command function on the virtual screen relates to the authorization input for initiating the plate separation protocol. If you recall the climax of Chapter 12 in Remake, it's Rude, not Reno, that ultimately authorizes the separation. The partner's bromance also gets a wee wink here, in that Reno's name forms part of Rude's password. It's worth highlighting that Kate Sith's fleeting cameo in Remake occurs precisely as the Sector 7 plate collapses. The concierge then announces that the Tonberry and Eligor suites have just become available. This loosely connects to Remake as well, because Eligor is the paranormal entity in the train graveyard that tries to stop Cloud, Tifa and Aerith from preventing Sector 7's destruction, while the Tonberry is battled in the same yard that Cloud and Aerith take on Rude during Chapter 8. As Cloud and Barrett prepare to call the elevator, Kate Sith offers to tell their fortunes. The first two readings ambiguously allude to Rebirth's ending, which I won't delve into here due to obvious spoilers, but the third contains a very specific phrase. It says that Cloud will find what he seeks, but shall forever lose what he cherishes most. In Advent Children, Sephiroth asks the blonde hero what he cherishes most, so that he might have the pleasure of taking it away. Cloud's eventual response is that there's nothing he doesn't cherish. Before Cloud falls asleep, there are a couple of hints in the suite of what's about to happen in the Interlude segment. The first is that an open magazine beside one of the beds has an article about Stamp. As I've discussed in previous episodes, the canine mascot is a key indicator for which world any given scene is taking place in. As an aside, Remake's Material Ultimania Plus verifies that Stamp's design was actually created by Palmer. There's also a painting of a wilting rose under a thorn bush. It evokes thoughts of the Sleeping Beauty folktale, particularly the Disney variant, and the slumbering Princess Aurora. This could relate to Aerith's condition in Zack's world. Intriguingly, Remake's Material Ultimania contains the unused artwork of a flyer from a theatre production Jessie was part of when she was an actress at the Gold Saucer. The play's name was Her Highness's Slumber. Once Cloud dozes off, the scene switches to Aerith's bedroom in the Interlude continuity. However, it's initially shown from the incapacitated Cloud's perspective, suggesting his consciousness has transcended time and space, much like Squall's experience in the Laguna dream sequences of Final Fantasy VIII. One of the most unusual things about Zack's continuity is that time doesn't seem to pass in the same way. An example of this is that his arrival into Midgar following the climax of Crisis Core coincides with the end of Remake, despite official media confirming these events occur several weeks apart. If you look closely, you might note that none of the clocks have hands, further deepening the mystery. I'll talk more about this in a future episode, along with why the plants and flowers of the garden seem to be withering away. Downstairs, Elmira reveals that Biggs visited the previous night to drop off some food. While this may have seemed odd to some players, Biggs' connection to the Gainsborough estate is covered in the novel Traces of Two Pasts by Kazushige Najima. As it turns out, Biggs grew up at the nearby Leaf House Orphanage in Centre District. He was left there as a baby with no name, so he called himself X as a kid. When Aerith first met him, she went by the alias Rona to help keep her identity hidden from Shinra, and the two bonded over this. Over time, the proprietors of the Leaf House didn't have the children's best interests at heart, so Biggs eventually got involved and bought the home, where he was loved by the kids and teachers alike. In Remake, it's commented that he and Jessie still regularly assist the orphans with their learning, which helps explain why he wakes up there during the game's ending sequence. Cloud is stirred from his dream by a knock at the door. Similar to the date mechanics in the original, Aerith, Tifa or Yuffie can invite Cloud to accompany them around the Gold Saucer, depending on the character affinity levels accrued during the playthrough. Otherwise, he will explore on his own. What's especially fun about a date with one of the girls is that the background music is personalised for each of them. There are also a lot of cool Easter eggs to discover in the park at this time, and I'll highlight some of my favourites. Of the numerous Kate Sith models around, the only one reading fortunes is located at Wonderment Square, which is where the character first does this in Final Fantasy VII. The snowboarding minigame will obviously be inaccessible until the final part of the trilogy, but the absence of a submarine minigame may have deeper implications for underwater traversal in Part 3. At the end of the G-Bike simulator, Cloud will screech to a halt on the Hardy Daytona, just as he does in the original. However, the animation of him swinging his sword above his head comes from a dedicated mobile game, also called G-Bike, which was available in Japan between October 2014 and December 2015. That contained Midgar Expressway Levels 2, and Cloud could take on enemies such as a rampant behemoth or guard scorpion, or be challenged to a racing duel with Reno, supported by Rude in a helicopter. The old roller coaster minigame of Speed Square has been replaced by a space battle simulator called Galactic Saviors. The vibe is definitely captured on the scoreboards, reminiscent of 1980s arcade games such as Space Invaders. Interestingly, the enemy is identified as the Gilgamesh Army, but it's unclear how their name connects to the interdimensional traveller we've already encountered in the Proto-Relic quests. Gilgamesh is featured many times in previous Final Fantasy titles and is sometimes accompanied by his sidekick Enkidu. The two were opponents and then companions in Mesopotamian mythology, with Enkidu being represented in Galactic Saviors as a class of warship. At the end of the gaming hangar is a couple who mention the Shinra space program and its rocket. Not only is this a reference to Sid Highwind's story, but the director of that program is Palmer. If Cloud is not exploring with Tifa, you will find her at Chocobo Square. This may be a throwback to the old game in which Tifa can be used as a jockey in place of Cloud. It's worth noting that the dialogue between characters can change, depending on who is with Cloud. For instance, if he's alone or with Tifa, he'll caution Aerith against making new friends, because anyone could be a Shinra spy, which, all things considered, is a little bit on the nose. This doesn't happen if Cloud is accompanied by Yuffie though. Arguably the best example of these variations is the moment Cloud sees the portrait of Jessie at Event Square, immortalising her role in the Gold Saucer's production of Loveless, not Her Highness's Slumber, as I touched on earlier. If Cloud is alone, he'll recall scenes with Jessie from Remake. If he's with Aerith, she'll inquire about whether Jessie was a girlfriend, a likely callback to the flirtatious interactions she had with Cloud. If he's with Tifa, however, she says Jessie was an inspiration to her, helping Tifa out when she ran into trouble in Midgar. The trouble in question is detailed in the novel Traces of Two Pasts, which also explains how she and Barrett joined Avalanche through Jessie. I won't delve too deeply into it here, as it's best kept for the Chapter 12 video, but the wings and golden adornments of Jessie's costume immediately reveal she played the goddess figure in Loveless. As discussed in my Chapter 5 episode, the G edition of Loveless is an allusion to Crisis Core and its villain Genesis, who was obsessed with the ancient epic and the goddess herself. Following the fatal shooting at the battle square by a man with a gun for an arm, the party is sent down to the Dust Bowl, the formal name for Corel Prison, to locate Barrett and prove his innocence. It turns out the big boss of this lawless community is not Dyne, but a man known as Solemn Gus. Despite their shared likeness, official material makes it clear that Gus is separate to Mr. Coates of the original, because the character was written into a draft of Rebirth where the Chocobo race had been scrapped. Coates meanwhile returns in the Ever Crisis adaptation of Final Fantasy VII. This is not the first time we've heard of Gus though. As I mentioned in my Dune on Upper City video, advertisements for his autobiography, Meditations, The Outlaw Life, can be found from Chapter 4 onwards. The Dust Bowl in general has some subtle nods to the old Corel prison sequence. For example, the player can pay to rest in the back of a trailer, whereas the original included a concealed spot to sleep in the driver's cab of Mr. Coates' truck. The thugs who follow Cloud around are a throwback to the creepy individual that shadows the party in the old game, laughing to himself. And there's even the unusual pit the player can climb down into. In Rebirth, however, it has more than just an empty item chest. This is where the Beast Battleground is situated, with what has to be one of the most abstract Easter eggs in the whole Remake trilogy. In the final round of the Silkus Cup Challenge, Cloud must take on a Guardhound type creature identified as Test Zero. The enemy intel for the monster says it's a test subject that managed to escape from a Shinra laboratory due to development oversights, and has since acquired the faculty of speech by mindlessly parroting all that it hears. Believe it or not, this is actually the creators poking fun at the Final Fantasy VII development team, many of whom returned for Remake and Rebirth. A unique Guardhound model, presumably used in the debugging process, was accidentally left in Final Fantasy VII's initial Japanese release. A group of them can be encountered at the bottom of the Corel prison well, and even had lines of dialogue in battle, saying things like "it hurts" and begging the player to stop attacking. As such, the enemy intel description of development oversights is a brilliant joke. The test zeros are additionally referenced in the Swindler minigame, where one of the apprentice liars might falsely claim there is a Type 0 monster in the Beast battleground. This instead alludes to another creature that escaped from a Shinra laboratory, the Type 0 behemoth, that can be fought beneath Midgar slums in Remake. The Umbral blade acquired in Gus's Solemnitude Manor is also worth a closer look. The design suggests it's a replacement for the Force Stealer sword of Final Fantasy VII, although the purple glow at its centre is reminiscent of Cloud's Ultima weapon. This may not be a coincidence, because the sword's special ability is Prime Mode, which enhances Cloud's Punisher mode and causes the blade to catch fire. The term Umbral, meanwhile, relates to the shadow or darkness cast by an object. This could be an allusion to Final Fantasy XVI, in which Clive accepts the truth of the flames he wields and learns how to semi-prime by confronting his shadow self. Furthermore, in the months preceding Rebirth's release, the Buster Sword became available as a downloadable sword for Clive. As in the original, Cloud must win a Chocobo race to earn the party's freedom from Corel prison, but the scenario now includes Billy and Pico from Bill's ranch in the grasslands. Although this may have come out of left field for some, the Chocobo breeding process in Final Fantasy VII does require the player to race birds that are looked after at the farm by Billy and his sister. Cloud is escorted to the Jockey Lounge by Esther, where he's introduced to Joe, the best rider in the sport. Joe features briefly during the corresponding scene in Final Fantasy VII, but can also be randomly encountered later in the game, where he competes against the player on his black Chocobo Tio. Interestingly, Esther confirms that the bird's name in Rebirth is Hyperion, and this isn't the first time he's been mentioned. In Crisis Core, Zack can talk to an NPC on Loveless Avenue who tells him that she was rescued in the Midgar wastelands by a jockey matching Joe's description, and his black Chocobo Hyperion. The NPC's story predates the construction of the Gold Saucer, but Joe's presence around Midgar may connect to the revelation that he races for Chocobo Sam of Woolmarket. Eagle-eyed fans may already have spotted Joe and Hyperion on the big screens at Chocobo Square, or on the Queen's Blood card that can be purchased from the desk there. Palmer is shown to be watching the race in the company of Rude and two staff members dressed as cowgirls, a potential callback to his cameo at the Honeybee Inn during Remake. Similarly, his sundae arrives with plenty of butterscotch, which could be a reference to him taking butter in his tea. Elena, meanwhile, is in the desert looking for Dyne. She begins to complain about the heat and asks who decided to make the Turks' suits black. This might be a bit of a meta joke, because their uniforms in the original were dark blue. The colour was first retconned for the Turk-centric mobile game before Crisis. Elena then demands that Rude brings her some ice cream, but specifies no vanilla. Later in the chapter, she is seen eating what seems to be sea salt ice cream, likely a little nod to the Kingdom Hearts series. This is supplemented at Park Central, where you can find an ice cream van selling both Sea Blue Swirl and Cosmo Salt Vanilla flavours. Elsewhere, there are stalls advertising 10,000 flavours of Cacturos. This is obviously a play on the churro treats typically available at fun parks, while the number relates to the 10,000 needles attack used by Cactuars throughout the Final Fantasy series. The Corel Desert has a lot of Cactuar content going on, but I'll come back to that in a future episode. The party is reunited with Barrett, and he finally discloses the truth of what happened to his hometown Corel 4 years ago. He mentions that Doc Sheeran saved his life, but couldn't save his arm, and Barrett thereafter chose to attach a weapon instead of a standard prosthetic, as I explained in the previous video. It turns out that Dyne underwent a similar procedure. Interestingly, the gun adapter for Barrett that can be acquired en route to face Dyne is the Vulcan cannon. In Roman mythology, Vulcan is the god of the forge, and thus the divine weaponsmith, which ties very nicely into this aspect of the story. When Barrett locates Dyne and tries to free him from his bindings, it becomes clear that his old friend is suffering from delusions. It's not made explicit in the game whether this is the result of psychological trauma or brain damage, but Rebirth's Ultimania clarifies that his mind is on the brink of collapse due to excessive drug use. Dyne is receptive to the help until he spies Cloud's soldier uniform, then turns on Barrett, quoting the latter's line from Remake about taking the load off his shoulders, which is exactly what Barrett tells Biggs, Wedge and Jesse after they bomb Mako Reactor 1. For the final phase of their duel at the scrapyard, Dyne's gun arm transforms into an insane tentacle-like appendage. As much as this seems like something from a Hideo Kojima game, it's not entirely without precedent, because Barrett's own weapon in Advent Children uses technology that quickly converts his metal hand into a high-tech cannon. It could also be said that Dyne's appendages shoot up from the earth like the tentacles of the Ruby weapon in the original, which is also battled in the Corel Desert. As before, Dyne believes his wife Eleanor and daughter Marlene died during Shinra's attack on Corel, although the two makeshift grave markers aren't present in this revised scene. Eleanor is never shown in Final Fantasy VII, but she appears briefly in Rebirth as Dyne dies. An important element of this is the pendant around his neck, which I touched on in the last video. This belonged to Eleanor herself, and is the only thing of hers that Dyne has in his possession. In the old game, he gives it to Barrett as proof that he's relinquished his position as the boss of Corel Prison, so to speak. Given Rebirth's teen rating, Dyne taking his own life was unlikely to remain, hence the inclusion of Shinra troopers here. If you return to the scrapyard in a future chapter, you'll find that Dio has marked the spot Dyne died with his gun, complete with Eleanor's pendant and the photograph of Marlene. And finally, in one of the most knee-jerk responses to an emotional scene I've ever witnessed in a video game, Director Palmer literally drops in on the others inside the Anuran suppressor mech. Anuran refers to a tailless amphibian and is probably a joke on Palmer's toad-like features. That said, we do fight the Director at Rocket Town in Final Fantasy VII, and the comedic elements of this are revisited when he pops up from the cockpit and begins dancing and slapping his butt. Amidst the chaos, Dio arrives and provides the party with the buggy, just as he does in the original, albeit not in person. As they attempt to flee the approaching Shinra forces, Cait Sith volunteers himself as driver, meaning he joins their escape without any dispute. What's curious is that the chase that ensues is reminiscent of Chapter 2 in Dirge of Cerberus, where Vincent Valentine must fend off pursuing guardhounds from the back of the Shadow Fox vehicle using a mounted machine gun. And who is with him aboard the Shadow Fox? Well, that would be Reeve. As if to reinforce this, the cutscene that follows the buggy's exit takes place in the Department of Urban Planning at Shinra HQ, where Reeve is casually humming the Cait Sith theme to himself, with one of the robotic cat models on the desk behind him. As an April Fool's joke in 2024, the Ever Crisis media team posted a mock screenshot announcing that Reeve would soon be a playable character. His limit break was said to be Inspire, described as having a set chance of imbuing inorganic enemies with life. But how does all this tie in with the bigger picture on Cait Sith? If you know, you know. Well guys, that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I invite you to check out all future episodes on CooperCon's channel. If you're interested in the lore side of things, my own books, Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII and Greek myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, are both available on Amazon. As always, I'd especially like to thank all of CooperCon's Patreon subscribers for your continued support. Without your backing, productions such as this would not be possible. If you're not already a patron, please do consider joining for some incredible CooperCon exclusives. But for now, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, and I'll speak to you again soon.